What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video. This time we're going to be going over the Stamina Sorcerer DPS. Just like our other build videos, we'll be going over our gear, our skill setups, and our CP point distribution, and then we'll finish things off with a 3 million dummy Parse, take a look at the common metrics report, and then discuss where Stamina Sorcerer DPS kind of stand in the endgame meta as of Clockwork City. Going to start things off here with gear. For our monster helm, we're going to be using two-piece Velodreths, both mediums, both in divines. You can go with Selines if you have Selines instead of Velodreths. They both pull about the same amount of DPS. It's just Velodreth is a little bit easier to proc compared to Selines. For our 5-piece set, we have a Jack of the Two-Fanged Snake here. You can use other sets. It all depends on what your group is looking for. If you're the only stamina DPS in the group, you're probably going to want to use Two-Fanged Snake or Spriggans, but if you are in a raid group with multiple stamina DPS, you might need to use a debuff set, such as Nightmother's Gaze or Sunder Flame, or perhaps a Morag Tong to help improve poison damage from your poison injection for all the stamina DPS. So do keep in mind you have options here when it comes to basically what I like to call penetration sets, which are sets that provide extra penetration. For this particular build, we're going to be going with Two-Fanged Snake as our penetration set, so we are being a little bit more selfish and not really providing any group debuffs. So this is under the assumption that you are the only stamina DPS. But again, if you have multiple stamina DPS in your group, you might be wearing a group debuff set such as Nightmother's Gaze. For our jewelry, we're going to be going with Vicious Ophidian. All three of them have weapon damage enchants. We will be using a heavy attack build here, in that we are using heavy attacks while we're on our front bar, so we don't really need to add in a stamina regen glyph on any of our jewelry. Weapon damage glyphs will be perfectly fine. For our weapons, we're still going to go with 2 daggers of the Vicious Ophidian. Our first dagger here is going to be infused with a poison damage enchant. You can go with Nirnhoned. They pull about slightly similar, pretty similar DPS. Infused is slightly better from my testing. And your offhand is going to be a dagger again. You can use either Sharpened, Precise, or Nirnhoned. I like to have Sharpened, so it gives me a little bit of extra penetration. You're going to be having a weapon damage enchant on this offhand dagger. We're still going to be using the Maelstrom Bow with either Nirnhoned or Sharpened as your trait. They did change the way the unique effect works on Maelstrom weapons as of Clockwork City. It's now a set effect instead of a enchant, so Infuse does not buff your Maelstrom Bow enchant anymore because it is a set effect. You'll also notice we're going to be using double Ravage health poisons here. These poisons are made using Alkahest and then Blessed Thistle, Nightshade, and Fleshflight Larva. So poisons were pretty powerful back in Horns of the Reach, and they remain very powerful in Clockwork City. Looking at our attributes, we have all of our points are into stamina. Our health is sitting at 16.2k, so if you want to move a couple of points out of stamina into health to give yourself a little bit more survivability, that's perfectly fine. You won't see that much of a loss if you're only moving about 8 or between 5 to 10 points into health. I do not have a Mundus Stone, but I'm going to pick one up right now. We're going to be using the Warrior as our Mundus Stone. Now you can use Lover if you are in a poorly optimized raid group. For example, if you're the only stamina DPS in your group, you'll get more use out of Lover versus Warrior. However, if you have other stamina DPS in your group, my recommendation is to stick with the Warrior and just use CP points to hit the penetration cap. We'll be discussing a little bit of what you should be looking for when we go over our CP points. For our bars, front bar here we have Hurricane, Shrouded Daggers. You can use Rapid Strikes, but Shrouded Daggers gives you a little bit more cleave damage. Blood Craze, Deadly Cloak, Bound Armaments, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. Dawnbreaker here just for the added weapon damage bonus. You won't be using this as your main ultimate. For your bow bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Rearming Trap. We have the double bar Bound Armaments, and then we have Ballista. This is going to be our primary damage ultimate. So You might be wondering where Surge is on the bars, whether you can put that in or not. You can put in Surge if you want to. It gives you a little bit more healing. Here it is right here. Crit Surge, you can use that. It gives you a pretty good self-heal, or you can also put down Vigor if you want to for some added healing. But there really isn't that much room to spare in terms of taking a skill out of the rotation. If you have to pick a skill to take out, I would probably take Blood Craze out, but this is really optimized for a Trials group, so you are going to be depending on your healer for heals and Deadly Cloak for your damage mitigation. Do keep in mind that you have a lot of resistance buffs as a Stamsorc. Hurricane gives you both major resolve and major ward, and Bound Armaments gives you minor resolve. So do keep that in mind. Stamina sorcerers generally have higher resist compared to other stamina DPS classes. Going over our CP points now, as of Clockwork City, you have 690 is the new CP cap, which gives us 230 to put across each of the 3 categories. Starting with the Lover, we have 75 in Tenacity and 75 in Mooncalf. That leaves 80 points, which you can put in these next 3 nodes however you see fit. 28 into Shadow Ward, 26 into Tumbling, and 26 into a Warlord. For our blue CP points, I'm going to go over here. This particular configuration is optimized for the raid group that I run in as a DPS. We get Infused, Torog's Crusher, as well as Stamplar running Power of the Light, and we have multiple stamina DPS, so we do have Night Mother's Gaze running. So this is kind of set up for that specific group. We don't have Alkosh and we don't have Sunderflame, but depending on your group, if you have Alkosh and Sunderflame, you won't necessarily need to put as many points into Piercing as I have here. So if you do need to take points out of Piercing, do so. If you need to put points into Piercing, my recommendation would be to start taking points out of Precise Strikes first, and then Thaumaturge, and then Master at Arms. That gives you a little bit more balance that way. I actually do have to redistribute these points a little bit, but for this particular configuration, we are going with 49 into Mighty, 56 in Precise Strikes, 61 into Thaumaturge, 44 into Master at Arms, and 20 into Piercing. This is what I found works out the best for my particular raid group. Again, depending on the debuffs and how many stamina DPS you might have, you're going to put differing amounts of points into Piercing to kind of maximize your physical penetration. You want to hit 18,200, so that's kind of the magic number to hit. Do the math, figure out the buffs, debuffs you have, and put points into Piercing accordingly. For our red CPs, you can alter this depending on the content you're running. If, for example, if you're running Hellra Citadel, you're facing a lot more physical damage, so you might want to put points out of your magic resists and put them into physical resists. So do keep that in mind. This particular configuration is a one-size-fits-most. This will do you well enough in all the trials, and it's very balanced in terms of mitigation. 61 into Ironclad, 1 into Medium Armor Focus, 56 into Thick-Skinned, Hardy, and Elemental Defender. Again, you can play around with these numbers depending on the content you are running. Some other things to take note of this build: we'll be using blue Stamina and Health Food, and we'll be using Essence of Weapon Power, Major Brutality, Major Savagery, and Major Endurance. If you have Medicinal Use up to max, which requires Alchemy level 50, you will always have these buffs up no matter as long as you keep your potions on cooldown. So that's the potions that we're going to be using. We're going to make sure to use them whenever they are available to us. So now we're going to go ahead with our 3 million dummy Parse. One thing to take note of, this is only a 3 million dummy, so in an actual trial, your boss fights are going to take a lot longer, anywhere between, let's say, 4 minutes and 30 minutes, depending on what trial you're running and the boss and your group DPS and all that. So do keep that in mind. Stamina sorcerers also don't have a native source of major fracture, so our Parse is inherently going to be lower than that of a Stam DK or a Stam Nightblade, who do have innate sources of major fracture from class abilities. So do keep that in mind when we look at our Parse, and if you are comparing this particular Parse with a Stamina Nightblade Parse. We don't have Major Fracture, so our DPS is going to be lower by comparison. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start our Parse in 3, 2, and 1. So there we have it. That's your Stamina Sorcerer Parse there. Let's get rid of Caltrops and rearming traps so we don't accidentally pull that skeleton. I don't believe I have combat metrics bound. No, I don't. Go ahead and take a look at our Parse, a 34.4k Parse on a Stamina Sorcerer. A very decent Parse. Especially considering that we don't have Major Fracture. If you have Major Fracture up, you can expect to see about probably a 5k, 6k increase depending on how well you do your rotation and things like that. So Stamina Sorcerers are unfortunately on the lower end of the totem pole when it comes to Stamina DPS, at least in terms of desirability. They can pull very good numbers, but they still pale in comparison to Stam DKs and Stam Nightblade in terms of damage potential. Where they shine is in their resistances. They have higher resistances than the other stamina classes. You can see here our physical and spell resists are pretty high. If you're looking at a non-stamina sorcerer DPS, something like a Stam Nightblade, you're not going to have as high resistances, so Stam Sorcs do benefit from improved survivability compared to other classes. But they just don't provide a lot of group utility by comparison. None of their abilities give the group any sort of buffs. Stamina Nightblades, for example, can give minor savagery, which gives you 3% extra weapon crit chance. Stam DKs can give you, I believe it's major brutality, some other buffs as well. So Stam Sorcs just don't really have as great group utility as these other classes. Stam Plotters can give you Power of the Light, which is pretty powerful. Stamina Wardens have the ability to be ranged, and they also provide some other good healing through their use of Green Lotus. Versus Stam Sorcs, you don't really get any group buffs out of them. I guess you could say if you use something like Dark Exchange or something, you can get minor minor prophecy, but if you're in one of those endgame groups that are going for leaderboard runs or trying to clear halls of fabrication or something, you already have a max orc in your group who are probably going to be using crystal frags, which would proc that anyways. So Stam Sorcs unfortunately are kind of at the lower end of the totem pole in terms of desirability, but that doesn't mean they can't pull very good DPS. A lot of raid groups, progression raids groups will take a Stamina Sorcerer because they do pull high DPS, and so don't let that discourage you from playing a Stam Sorc in the endgame content, in the endgame meta. So that's it for this build video. Hope this helps, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.